All right, you guys, welcome to another episode of Behind the Visual, where I talk to all those people responsible for those images and videos you see out in your world every single day. And I, of course, am your host, advertising and lifestyle photographer Mark Hansen. And today, my guest is David M. Watts. And David is a chief creative officer, he is an editor in chief, he is a consultant, he is a mentor. He is a very cool guy who's done a lot of things and has a lot of knowledge about the fashion industry and fashion brands. And we talk about how he was working for a licensing company that had the opportunity to work with a video game that was just starting up, and they came to them about licensing opportunities for their video game. The company turned it down, and it turned into one of the biggest video games around, and even a movie franchise. So stick around, listen to see what video game that was. I think you will be shocked to learn which one it was. It was billions of dollars probably down the tube, especially in licensing. So yeah, check that out. We also talk about what David says every creative needs as I guess as a partner to be successful. If you really want to be successful and you're a creative person, you need to listen to this because this is very important. And I totally agree with him on this. We talked about the time he had a job and he was working for Andrew Lloyd Weber and how he handled that for a few years. We talked about his magazine. It sounds very cool, and it has getting ready to launch the digital edition of that sometime here in a little while. We also talk about how his accent helps him with especially people who are outside of Europe, that they think it's amazing because David is from Europe. He lives in London. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, where he grew up. He grew up in Ireland. And then we talk about how he helps mentor Black fashion designers in New York City. So we talk about a lot of things, and that's just some of it. David's a great guy. He can tell you some great stories. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. So check it out. Let me know what you think, and like it, thumbs up it, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And I look forward to hearing what you guys think about this one. Okay, so let's get into this a little bit. Let's start with that revelation of where you were born, where you grew up.
Well, Mark, as I mentioned, I was actually born in Ireland. And
most you look exactly like somebody from Ireland in my head.
Most people don't know that I'm Irish because of how I look. And this is going in your podcast, I'm not Caucasian or I don't have red hair. So my actual birth background, my biological background, my mother was Irish and white, and my father was from Ghana and was Black. So I'm, 50 mixed ethnicity, 50-50, but I consider myself as being Black. But growing up in Ireland, I was actually adopted at birth. So my family, my parents, I consider them to be my family. I don't make a difference as my adopted parents because they were there from day one. So my parents had already 5 children, and I was the baby that came along, and I was just so irresistible they had to have me.
Of course.
So basically, I was the baby. I was adopted, and I grew up. There were one brother and 4 sisters, but essentially my 3 elder sisters were considerably older because my parents were considerably older when I was adopted. So they were already grown up. So I kind of grew up with my brother and my sister at home, and they were still a number of years older than me. Yes, I grew up in Dublin, which is obviously the capital of Ireland. I went to school there, was educated there, went to university. When I was growing up in Ireland, there was not anybody of any color besides Caucasian. There were no people of color. The only time I ever discovered, people who looked like me was when I went to New York at age 10. And it was, it wasn't a culture shock because you're different, but you don't also stand looking in the mirror at yourself every day. You kind of see yourself through how other people see you. So it was quite an interesting, I've talked to other people I know who have been, who've grown up in different circumstances that aren't the norm. And you don't necessarily see yourself as being different because you're not standing outside looking at yourself, as I said. But equally, you don't tend to get treated differently because once people know you, then it's just, that's David and that's,
Right.
So it's not, and it's very interesting because obviously with the whole Black Lives Matter and the whole awareness of racism and, unconscious bias and how much has been going on about all that in the last, 18 months. And I try to explain to people that, sometimes people don't like you just because they don't like you. It's not because of the color of your skin. And my circumstances growing up in that situation, and also people say to me, "Oh no, but how did you grow up in a white family? How was that?" I'm going, well, I didn't sit there going, "Well, you're white and I'm not."
Right.
That was my family, and they love me, and So it's an interesting one for people to kind of get their head around, particularly in America. I mean, when I went to America the first time, 10 years old, and of course I opened my mouth and to them, like my accent
Yes.
sort of came up, like they would be stopped in their tracks. And it was like, where are you from? Sort of, and it goes, me, you said European. It's like, it's so strange the way that people relate and behave to you. I found that anyway, that was quite interesting. And really the first time I kind of experienced overt racism, and, in your face sort of negative racism.
Yeah.
I was still relatively young, so it wasn't necessarily, I wasn't as tuned into it, but it was an interesting experience. And also I went to New York quite a lot when I was growing up, and my parents used to take us from my house there. So I kind of got used to it, and, I knew it, and, I spent lots of time there, but it was still a very interesting experience.
Wow. Yeah, I thought when you say you first experienced some sort of racism, y'all taking a trip down south someplace. Well,
No, it was actually in New York, but it's just, but it's also quite interesting because when I was growing up, my mother's sister, so my maternal aunt, had emigrated to America many, many years, as a lot of Irish people had done. And so she had been married and had family, and, who were, first, second generation American. But it was so interesting because I had kind of cousins who were relatively comparable in terms of age to me. And of course, they'd be coming back from school, or end of summer holidays, and they'd be talking about, these Black, kids, and they didn't I didn't get along with them, and not quite, derogatory names, but just like, and one day we got into this conversation, and I said, you said that word, really negatively, I'm Black. And of course, they kind of just stopped and they said, "You're not Black, you're European." And it's not the first time I've heard that
really?
in America. Yeah, I know it's completely, on its head. I mean, we were kids,
Right. Yeah.
young,
Yeah.
but even like into teenagers, and you just think, well, but it was like, well, you're saying that about that person because you don't know them, but that's how they look. But you wouldn't say that about me, or if anybody said that about me, you'd be very upset on my behalf because, we're a family. And it is like, it comes back to that thing about, the perception of racism. It's how you're brought up, it's what you see, it's how you're exposed to it. Nobody's born a racist.
Well, it's like that picture of that little kid in the KKK outfit going up to the police officer with the shield. Have you seen that shot?
No, I don't think I've seen that.
There's some big riot or some kind of protest or something going on. This was many years ago. And there's a police officer's all in riot gear, and one of them's got his shield on the ground. He's standing there, and this little kid couldn't have been more than 2 years old or so, 2.5, something like that, in full KKK, head to toe, the comb, the whole all white, went up to the thing and was like looking at the shield. And the cop said he didn't even realize it till he felt something hit his shield, and he looked down. There was just this little kid, and he just looked up at him. And I mean, the kid didn't hate the guy. He was just over there curious what was going on. But his parents obviously were full on KKK, anti everything. And it's exactly what you said. You're not born racist. That's something you were grown up to be, or your surroundings make you. Yeah. I told my daughter's looking for stuff to write, to do a speech on for school, and she's in college. And so she asked me, and I gave her a list of stuff. And one of them was, how to make college so everyone can go to college, and you have to join a group. If you're going to college for free, you have to join a group that has a mix of cultures and ethnicities and everything else in that group. So you meet these people, and so hopefully when you leave college, you have not stuck with just your, say, white group of friends or black group of friends. You have met everybody, and so you're not as likely to be a bigot by the time you leave as you would be if you just stayed in your own little world.
Absolutely. I don't think it's even about bigotry. It's kind of about it's that other issue. It's like the unconscious biases that are kind of imbued into us because of television and advertising, and all those things that we're totally unaware that we are absorbing. But they are biases, and and they do come out. And it is that thing of, if you're with people that look like you. And again, I come back to, when I was growing up and I was in a white family, so it didn't, it was a weird kind of dichotomy, but actually, it didn't mess me up in my head. It was a different time. Nowadays, of course, there's a lot of conversations about, people should grow up in families of their own ethnicity, and so there are lots of things that weren't like around in the sort of in the zeitgeist then. Right. But equally, it didn't change my upbringing. I had a fantastic upbringing. I had a great education, and my parents loved me. They just happened to be a different color to me.
So did your cousins in America, or anybody in America, because of the accent, did they also think that you were smarter than them? Or were you just smarter than them?
Well, I think I probably was. Yeah, I mean, there is something to be said for an Irish education. I think it's an interesting question. And with a serious note, I think, and what you touched on, what you're exposed to and how you're brought up has an enormous bearing on your educational span. And I was very fortunate from the age of 10 to be traveling from Europe to America every summer, mixing, because my parents were very sociable, but also I was always taken with them to places. I wasn't left behind. And because I was the baby of the family, I was always taken anyhow. So I was very fortunate, but also that does change your perception because you're interacting with people who are older than you all the time. Mm-hmm. So even as from like 10, 12, 14, 15, I was always with adults more than anybody else. And then with the traveling, so you do actually have a very different perception of the world. And there is another world, it's not, you're never really, or I wasn't, I was very fortunate not to be kind of in a very small area, in a very small, locale with, all the people that were the same as me, because they weren't, they didn't nobody looked like me, so, it was interesting in that context of people do perceive you differently. And more so even today, people, if I go to America, I haven't been to America, the US for quite a while, but before COVID and that. So when I talk, and if I'm having a meeting, or you are sometimes aware that people are much more attentive to me than if I was just a regular person from that particular area. And I have used it to my advantage. Obviously, I open my mouth and I get people's attention, and that's the way of the world. But I was having this conversation with somebody recently in America who I've been doing some, preliminary work with, and she was saying to me, "Oh well, we'll just wheel you out when you get here, because A, everybody will just stop and shut up because when you open your mouth, and B, people will believe that you have much more authority because you're European and the way you speak." Yeah. And I found that really fascinating. I mean, I'm fine, happy to be wheeled out, but it is quite interesting. It is perception.
Absolutely. I can see it. I had somebody call me one of these spam calls, and he had an accent very similar to yours, trying to sell me insurance, health insurance. But before he told me that's what he was doing, he asked, he says, "Mark there?" And I said, "Yeah, this is Mark." And he said, "Hi, Mark." And then he started talking, and if it'd be like, "Well, hey, Mark, let me tell you," I'd be like, "I gotta go," and I would just hung up the call.
The accent caught you completely.
The accent got me going, wait, that accent doesn't call my house ever. It's always
has to be a client or somebody important.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I was like, all right, I'll listen and see what happens here. But so did all that, the travel, the family, the schooling, at what point did you like figure out or start getting into fashion and figure out fashion is your thing that you love, that you're all about?
Oh, interestingly, I'd always been very creative. I was always drawing and sketching and painting and making stuff, very kind of arty. Not particularly fashion. And then probably teens, early teens, I started getting interested in fashion. I used to be a very much a shoe person. I'm
Yeah.
obsessed with shoes and sneakers. And my sister, my sister and brother who lived at home, are 5 years and 7 years older than me. So basically, I started. My sister and I were very. We were actually friends, which is quite unusual for to have a 5 year gap. But
Yeah.
we've got on really well. I remember, and so we kind of hung out. And as I got older, my interest in fashion kind of tipped over into she was like interested in fashion, and I would say, oh well, I don't like this or I don't like that, and she basically started to be aware that I actually had good taste. So I became the go-to and then going out shopping. Oh, do you want to come out shopping with me? Because if I didn't like it, she knew there was something wrong with it. So I'd rather have what I would say about the comment. So that kind of started it the way. And then my mom used to do the same, and it became that thing whereby I just had an eye, and whether it was fashion or whether it was art or design for stuff that people found was either good style or good taste, or you're born with, I think you're born with good taste, or with the sense of style, and that was kind of how it started. And then from there, so yeah, from my early teens, I didn't study art at college or school. I didn't really have I didn't have the self-confidence. I didn't think I was good enough to study art. And because my parents were both sort of self-made, so they, I didn't come from a well-to-do background. They had their own businesses, but they were, self-made and small businesses, but they were also very independent, and they gave us a lot of independence. So they said, you can do whatever you want to do. We'll support you, whatever you want to do. So I was like, I don't think I should do art because I don't really think I'm good enough. And nobody really said, you're really good, because we didn't do art at school. And I went to a Catholic boys' school. We did Latin and Roman history. We didn't do art or design, the classics, sciences. So art was never explored. And I have a big bugbear about that, in terms of the way that people don't get exposed to art at an early age really does impact on what they can do, particularly minorities and underprivileged kids. So I went to do business studies at university, and I hated it, absolutely hated it, because I wanted to be I didn't realize it, but I was a creative at heart, and I didn't want to do accountancy and business psychology. But I graduated, I stuck it out, and then I was just turning 20, and I decided I needed to have an adventure, and I was going to go to New York because I had family and friends there, but I really wanted to go to California, and decided, a very dear friend of mine had moved to San Francisco, and he was established there, and he said, well, you can come out here, you can crash here and see, what you can do. And in those days, you could get working visas, and before all the restrictions and visas came into play. And we're talking like in the 1980. So it was extraordinary, because I arrived in California. I've always wanted to go to California. It was extraordinary. I had friends there, and it was just an extraordinary experience. So it was amazing, absolutely amazing. I met some fantastic people and started to hang out with some good friends, and it was just a really, really cool, exciting, opportunity. And my friends were saying, "Oh, but California is so far away." But like, it was another world, because Ireland in the 80s was not Ireland like it is now, or like in the last 10 years. And it was still a big city, but it was nothing by comparison. So it was an extraordinary opportunity and experience, and great to travel and meet new people. And then actually after a year, I got a little homesick and decided I was going to come back to Ireland. Came home, and I was back for 2 weeks and thought, what have I done? Because in a year of living in California, I had changed so much in my head.
Right.
I couldn't even start to adjust to being back in Ireland. So I worked very hard, saved up every penny I could make, and went back to California a year later. So I ended up 83, 82, 83, actually no, 83, 84, the year of the Olympics in Los Angeles, spent a year in LA, then went back to San Francisco, spent 2 years in San Francisco, had an absolute blast. I mean, had some really good people, really fantastic people, really good friends. A very dear friend of mine at the time who was from Ireland, one of my best friends, actually worked for the airlines, had taken a sabbatical, and he came out to California and stayed with me for like 6 months. So it was like,
Nice.
boys on tour. It was fantastic. And then towards that 85, I think it was, I basically it was becoming much more difficult with visas and working permits, and I'd had a really, it wasn't, I did nothing related to fashion. I actually worked for a law firm.
Really?
But it was an amazing law firm, these amazing people. And it was San Francisco, as you know, it's either tech or law. It's very old school.
Right.
And it was a really old school law firm. The senior partners were like 100. But incredibly nice people. And again, interestingly, the concept on, I think I was the only person of color in the entire firm.
Wow.
And the senior, and I know for a fact, because my boss, who was like the senior administrator, she used to say, well, the board are always talking about you. They love your voice on the telephone. And because one day, one of the senior partners said, who is that voice? Who is that voice? Because I used to sometimes have to cover reception. I used to train reception people, and sometimes they were like having breaks, or somebody was out sick. I'd have to jump on the switchboard, because in a law firm, all of the calls have to be logged correctly, because the call coming to a lawyer can be admissible in court. So it's a really strict regimen about how you actually log calls, and I used to train people to do all this. So sometimes I'd have to jump on the phones for like a couple of hours, and of course the partners will be getting calls through, and the senior partner, one of the women, she go, who? And I go, oh, it's David. I love your voice is so, I love hearing it. And you get away with murder, but they absolutely loved it. And again, it's like a whole totally treated so differently because of the way that you speak. It is that I hadn't thought about that for years, but it just kind of came back to me. I remember, her saying, oh my God, the senior partner thinks your voice is amazing. She wants to, can you be on the phone all the time? No, but it's like, there you go.
Yeah, I can see that, because probably, like I said, if you opened your mouth and had some strange Southern accent, or some Midwestern thing, that you would, yeah. I have a friend of mine. She's I think her dad, same thing. I think her dad's black, her mom's white. When you see her, she's from the South. She has a strong Southern accent. And when you see her for the first time, you meet her and she goes, hi, you just go, where the hell did that come from? And I've been around her multiple times when she's met people for the first time, and she says, hi, I'm Kelly. And people just go, what? I mean, they are not expecting it at all. So I could definitely see how that would work in your favor.
An interesting one, yes.
Yeah. So eventually you came back, obviously.
Came back to the UK, came back to Ireland, came to London for similar reasons, and then I started working in fashion. In the sort of mid to late 80s, the fashion industry was booming in the UK. The textile industry was huge. I ended up working, I actually went and studied fashion in London.
Yeah.
And then I found a job. Weirdly, one of the visiting lecturers at the college I was in had a fashion business, and they said, oh, when I was graduating, we'd love you to come and help us out, if you want to come and get some work experience. And kind of that started it. I spent about 18 months with them. Then I wanted to kind of move up the food chain, and I was very fortunate to get a job with a textile group called Coats Viella. And Coats Viella were, in the day, one of the largest textile manufacturing groups in the world. They actually had manufacturing divisions, private label, they had brands like Jaeger and Viola shirts, which are kind of staple brand, kind of the Czech, flannel shirts. They're all a huge amount of brands and private label, but and threads and yarns and precision engineering. They were huge.
Wow.
And I actually went to work for one of the large manufacturing divisions, which was a private label manufacturer for the UK high street businesses. So there were like five design teams. I went in as kind of the design manager. We did women's wear, lingerie, sleepwear, leisure wear, children's wear, men's hosiery, men's accessories.
Wow.
So there were large divisions, and it was a huge operation. So over time, I started to work across. I moved from design really into management and running design teams and hiring, and so part of the business that was developing at that time was consumer product licensing. The licensing in the late 80s was huge. Space Jam, and it was weird. I just see Space Jam has been re-released.
Yeah.
And I just, oh my God, that was like one of the properties I worked on. It's like, so Disney,
wow.
At the time, like Disney, Turner, Hanna-Barbera, they were all different organizations,
Right.
and basically I think they're all owned by the same person now, but basically working in licensing, particularly for high street, big high street retailers in the UK, licensing was huge business. And one of the people that I worked with was actually
real quick, explain what high street in the UK is equivalent to in the US.
Okay, so
I understand, but I'm sure there's some people listening like have no clue.
Yeah. Well, when we say high street never really existed in America, because you kind of had mainstream brands like Gap and Banana Republic, but then also you have what we would probably call contemporary brands like the Banana Republics and other J. Crew, and which are brands that we never had in the UK. So in the UK, high street was essentially a private label brand. So a brand like Marks and Spencer's, which is a very historic British brand. And nowadays, things like H&M and Zara and Mango, they would be considered to be high street brands, but they're still, inverted commas, fashion led.
Right.
But high street, was the staple. It still is. It's one of the staples of the British textile industry. Designer fashion is still a relatively small part of British fashion. So, the high street it's the big driver of the industry. Right. So that's what I was doing. And then licensing was such a huge part of that, because, within consumer product licensing, apparel and accessories is probably about 50% of all licensing. So I ended up working with this company who were a private company who did a lot of children's classic properties like Paddington Bear and Peter Rabbit, so Beatrix Potter, which are very, very large, IPs in their own right. And this company had the global rights for all of these properties, about 20 intellectual properties globally. So I worked with them for a couple of years, got on really well with the owners and the people who ran the two directors who ran the London business. And one day they took me for lunch and said, we'd like you to come and work for us and run our apparel division. So it was like, okay, so that's interesting. So anyway, 5 years passed and I'm still there, bears and rabbits. But it was an extraordinary experience because, as I say, licensing was booming. I was head of all apparel, children's wear, accessory licensing worldwide. At any given point, I was running 200 to 300 licenses, just in rotation. We did huge projects, across brands in Europe and, retail, because Beatrix Potter, Peter Rabbit is an enormous property, globally, and Paddington Bear similarly. So I also was responsible, which kind of got into my creative side. I was then responsible for setting up our in-house design studio, because working with third-party licensees, is very complex when you have a very sort of strict rules of, you know, how things look and colors. And so we used to do a lot of, particularly when it's in fashion and apparel, because they're trying to be fashionable and keep up with fashion stories and trends. But, you know, Peter Rabbit's jacket has to be blue, or, you know, Paddington Bear's duffel coat, you know. So we decided it was a much easier process if we would actually do a lot of design development every season, which came, you know, from my own background, it was easy to do. But we actually set up we'd set up trends, and we do mood boards, and we give them themes, and we actually create a lot of visual content for the licensees, so they could kind of just cherry pick. So they loved it because it was on trend, but it was like all done for them. So, but it also worked because it saved me and, you know, our approvals team so much headache, because, you know, when people do it wrong and send you stuff and you have to go through all the approvals process, and then, now that's all wrong, change it, send it back, you know how it is. So it saved so much time and energy just by having in-house design. But it was great. But, you know, again, we had 6 offices worldwide.
Wow.
You know, Australia, Japan, Germany, US.
Did you have to travel?
Yes, traveled a lot. Well, I was responsible for all apparel, so, you know, we would coordinate into the offices, but because of I ran all the design as well, and all the in-house design and all the approvals came through the UK. It was, you know, we were very much integral to how all, you know, we were the hub, and it all went out from us.
Okay.
It was fantastic. It was fantastic as well, and, you know, traveling. Again, when you're traveling, you know, in business and you're being chauffeur driven and, you know, on expenses, it's a very nice life. You're talking about rabbits, but, you know, staying in first class hotels. But it was extraordinary and a really interesting time in the industry. And I moved over to licensing for non-fashion. I actually worked for Lord Lloyd Weber, Andrew Lloyd Weber, the musical impresario. Yes, they were looking for somebody to basically come in and set up to manage their licensing, because they never really had a proper structure for their licensing. So basically, after a lot of backwards and forwards with the teams at the Really Useful Group, which is Andrew's company, I was hired. And then the day I arrived, they said, "Oh, you know, you can hire a team and a creative team, but also, you know, that we really want you to oversee all of our in-theater merchandise as well." And I said, "Wow, excuse me?"
That wasn't part of the deal, huh?
I literally had never been discussed. I arrived the first day, you know, at my desk, and they said, "Oh, by the way, this is the merchandise manager. He's going to report to you, and you're now responsible for all product." You know, and basically, you know, that is, you know, everything that the theater all the merchandise that goes into a theater for a production around the world. So Andrew Lloyd Weber has first class productions, second class productions, touring productions. Of all their productions, amateur productions, usually, and in every case, there will have to be merchandise and product developed. So it was like, okay, then, quick up to speed on that, and then really coming up with the strategy for for licensing for all of their IP, coming up with, you know, lookbooks and style guides and ideas and concepts, then negotiating licenses, putting that into play, and managing that. So ending up doing that for a number of years. But it was extraordinary, because, again, I'd never been involved in theater production, and it does stretch your knowledge base. And the people that worked for the Really Useful Group at that time were amazing, incredibly talented people. You know, there was a film division, obviously the theater division was the main, you know, production company. There was a music licensing division, there was a music recording division, licensing division, which I ran, and it was amazing, absolutely amazing. You know, and Andrew Lord Lloyd Weber, he's quite an interesting individual, and one of our favorite stories, there would always be a Christmas party, which was usually a very posh, you know, catered affair, because Andrew would always attend, and Andrew has very high standards. So if Andrew was coming, everything had to be just so. And we'd always get a Christmas gift, and we'd always get, you know, a really nice Christmas gift and a Christmas bonus. You know, we were very well treated. So one year, the Christmas, one Christmas, we were due in the new year. We were opening a new production, a revival production of Jesus Christ Superstar on Broadway, and obviously all this work was happening, and, you know, we were coming up to, you know, there were already, I think, in rehearsals, but basically our Christmas party And Andrew said, it's been very challenging times, and this year we decided that no Christmas presents. You'll still get your Christmas bonus, but we really had to cut down on expenditure. And he was kind of just joking to a certain degree. He said, I'm just pulling your leg. He said, we have decided that, because so much hard work has gone into this, every division has been involved in this. We're taking the entire company to New York for the opening night weekend of Jesus Christ Superstar.
Wow.
From the post boy to the everybody, so 120 people.
Wow.
And not only that, we flew out to New York for 3 nights. Obviously, we had the opening night party, and we were given a stipend of a couple of $100 each, and cars, and it was absolutely extraordinary. And that was our Christmas present from Andrew. Yeah. So it was they were the good days. Yeah. that hasn't happened since, but it was
yeah,
it was very cool. But
yeah, there's a lot like that hadn't happened since. Yeah, everything budgets seem to have been cut completely lately.
Very, very, very good. I found some photographs of the event that the
really?
paparazzi with my colleagues, because she was one of the senior PRs of the company, and as we were riding, of course, the photographers all knew her, so they were photographing her with me because we kind of went together. And I just discovered them. I just thought, oh my God, I was so young.
yeah, that happens too, for sure. Did you? Okay, I saw something that you worked in China for a little while.
Yeah, I set up my own boutique agency about 8 years ago.
Okay.
And partly to move away from, I've been doing a lot of work supporting business one-to-one support with startup fashion brands, and I've been doing it for a number of years here in London, and then I'd also moved over to working with the British Fashion Council. And the British Fashion Council are the organization who own London Fashion Week.
Oh, wow.
A little bit like New York Fashion Week, which is now run by the CFDA. And so the British Fashion Council own London Fashion Week as an IP, and they run it. And so twice a year, London Fashion Week happens, all the shows, all the collections, all the trade events, etc. So my role was actually head of designer business support. So all of the designers who would be involved in the BFC programs and initiatives and support mechanisms had access to me 24/7 for free. So I'm sure you know the challenges and the constraints that fashion startups face generally, and multiply that by 200 designers came under the umbrella. And I can tell you that after 3.5 years, I kind of had enough. Because I've been doing it for 4 years before that, also in London, running a European Regional Development Fund program for fashion startups.
Oh, wow.
So I calculated that by the time I'd finished with the British Fashion Council, nearly 8 years ago, I had more than 1,000 fashion designers had come across my desk in the 7 years previous.
Wow. Okay, so out of 1,000 fashion startups, how many are still yes? How many are still in business?
I was having that conversation today at a press conference. Yeah, it's very telling, and I was just talking about it today. Even the designers, fashion is incredibly tough, and it's a brutal industry. It's not the glamour, it's not the excitement. It's not the the retail store openings and champagne parties. It's hard graft, and to be able to succeed in fashion, and now I'm thinking about 20 years ago. Even then it was tough, but it was still manageable to be able to start a small business, grow organically, get access to retailers, be able to sell your product, be able to finance it, sell a bit more, grow your business. That just became harder and harder, and really nowadays that, with the power that the LVMH and the Kering and the Richemont, who control more than 100 of the fashion brands between them.
Wow.
Just trying to get floor space, trying to get retail space, trying to get buyer engagement, trying to get on the press, trying to get advertising. It's so difficult. So direct to consumer e-commerce has been fantastic, but it's not a magic bullet. People have no idea of the challenges and the problems and the cost of e-commerce. It's just not, you can't do it unless you're a big business, to do it organic, or you can do it as a small business, but you can't make any money from it.
Right.
And it's very, very challenging. So quite a lot of them didn't make it. Quite a lot of them made it for quite a while. Interestingly, 10 years in, there were a number of them who are still around, but it's, they've still struggled, and it's quite interesting when you look back and when I look back and see all the ones who didn't make it. Fortunately, I think in some ways, some of our programs, our support programs, and I would like to think some of my advice, they did it for a while, realized they couldn't grow their businesses, and then decided to get back into the industry. And a number of them have, ended up doing amazing, taking up amazing jobs. Some of them work in Valentino, one of them works for Tom Ford. So people that, which I always advise them to do anyhow, right at the beginning. I always said you should go and work for somebody else, make the mistakes on somebody else's dime.
Yes.
Get your contacts, get your network, because you will need everything and everybody in the fashion industry at one point. So go and do that on somebody else's book. And some of them did, but people are very, creatives. They want to, it's my thing. I want to do my own thing. I want to have my own business. I want to have my own label.
Yeah.
And of course, that comes with a huge amount of, lack of understanding, lack of knowledge, lack of experience, and lack of money. And it's very tough and getting tougher.
That's incredible advice. I think if they would take it, they would definitely benefit. I have a friend of mine who's not in fashion at all, but he was at a company and working for the company, and he made all these contacts with all these clients, and then saw how the company was bought out by somebody else, and they were running it really poorly, constantly coming to him, wanting more out of him on how to run it than they were willing to pay for. Finally, after working there for years, left, started his own company, and it's been very successful, and actually just sold off 80% of his company to another company and made a ton of money. And it was all because he went in and did everything basically you said you need to do first.
Yeah. You learn, it's because people have no idea how hard, how challenging fashion, to learn the industry, to be able to make a product and manufacture a product and sell a product and cost it and get raw materials. And before you have to, like any other business, you have HR, you have banking, you have accountancy, you recruit, all those things. They still apply, even if it's fashion. You just happen to be, making a fashion product rather than a widget or a washing machine. And it's, and people don't get it because they're creative. Like, oh, it's great, it's marvelous, and we make it work because we're talented. Unfortunately, talent, as you will know, isn't always necessarily enough. Which is why there are lots of creatives out there who haven't succeeded and don't have jobs. Because it isn't enough.
No, it's not. I wish I had somebody give me that advice when I was starting out, because I didn't assist anybody, and I had to make all those mistakes on my own. I didn't even really think of assisting as an option. But I wish somebody had told me that.
Yeah.
Because then I could have made all the mistakes I made at the beginning of my career, or watch somebody else make them and learn from them at least.
Just to be exposed to that, you learn what not to do. And of course, as you know, I'm sure in your business now, what the amount of money you save, or that you don't spend because you realize those mistakes shouldn't be made and you don't make them. And that is, that goes across the board. And I was literally talking about this today with a brand, and they're going, oh, but it'll be different. You hear it'll be different for us every time. And I'm going, okay, then, don't say I didn't tell you, but when you come back to me in 6 months' time, and you're going to go, oh, we've got orders, but we need $35,000-$40,000 to make them, and then you go to the bank, and the bank goes, who are you? Because you've never had a conversation with them. So. Anyway, on we go. I can't get up onto my, I've been doing it for so long, it just comes out, like, do this, trust me, I know I've been doing, just do it. And actually, interesting, one of the people that came to me at the British Fashion Council, a very talented Italian designer, and he was living in London, and, he tried at first to do a menswear collection. He was very talented. He had family connections with tailoring factories in Italy. So it was all, he had a lot of things going for him.
Oh, yeah.
He had the talent, he had the factories, but of course it still takes a huge amount of money. And then to get from creating a collection to selling a collection and delivering a collection, it's a big thing. And he actually had been approached. He was actually approached about a job with Tom Ford. And he came to me and he said, what should I do? I said, take the job immediately. I said, do you realize that you will have a business card that says designer Tom Ford? I said, everybody and anybody in the fashion industry will talk to you.
Yeah.
I said, you know the contacts you can make, fabric manufacturers. I said, even to buttons and zips and, text. I said, anything and anybody will give you the time of day because you are a Tom Ford designer, because the brand is ubiquitous. And he was going, yeah, but then my label. I said, trust me. I said, if you go in there, spend 2 years, I said, you'll have all these contacts, you'll have a reputation, you'll understand at a brand, because you want to do men's tailoring in the luxury sector, you will see what works, what doesn't work, how they merchandise it, what's just for the catwalk, I said, just go and do it. Didn't. In he goes. 2 years later, he comes out to me, oh my God, thank you. It was the most amazing experience. I got all these, and I go, told you.
Yeah.
And it's just sometimes, and people, because sometimes it's ego and sometimes, but sometimes people just need to be kind of guided a little bit. And I had another chap who was a very talented designer, came out of Central St. Martin's College of Art here, but he was a women's wear designer and was very, very kind of avant-garde and very kind of, out there, floaty, red carpet, very, very out there. Yeah. And he came to me, and he said, oh my God, I've been approached by Adidas to go and work on their new tech side. But he said, it's nothing I do. And I said to him, Oren, you will have the best time because it's going to stretch your brain from all the things that you do and know and like into all the things that you've never experienced with, whether it's Lycra or whether it's, tech or, you will. And I said, that will change your entire perspective of your own fashion narrative and will help with lots of different skills. You'll have all these different skills and ideas that you will then apply to your DNA. So it will give you something different. And of course, again, 3 years later, he came back and he goes, oh my God, it was like, the first 6 months I hated it, and then it's like they started letting me doing all this and that, and now he's on he's actually part of the evening wear team at Burberry, and has been for a number of years. Oh, wow. So it's like I got, and I kind of cite these examples because I say to me, okay, look, this person I know, I had this conversation, they went and did this, now they're doing that. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. But it is very interesting.
Yeah, wow. That's like I said, I wish I'd had somebody give me background advice. So the fact you're doing it, and that's at least some people are listening to it, that's a good thing.
Absolutely. I'm very fortunate. I love the industry. I'm very passionate about it. I'm always trying to help people if I can. I do mentoring with actually Black designers in New York.
Tell me a little bit about that. You tell me that you're mentoring some Black designers in New York.
Yeah, basically, there are two organizations, Raise Fashion and Harlem's Fashion Row, and they're both. One is more established. Harlem Fashion Row started 14 years ago, and Raise Fashion is a couple of years in. Basically, they kind of came out of the whole situation about Black fashion designers in America really don't get, there isn't a level playing field for access to industry. Right. Yeah. In a lot of industries, not just fashion, but particularly, again, back to the creative sectors, it's very, very limited. The number of Black-owned fashion designers who are profile, successful, on the shop floor of, the Nordstroms and the Saks and the Bloom, are very limited. So, and part of that is access, but also part of that is having some of that knowledge and that training to be able to understand what you need to bring to the market and how you need to do it. It's not that they don't have talent, but right. Sometimes it needs a fine honing. And really just, again, it's that weird thing of, I never see myself as being an advocate for Black rights. That's not what I'm doing. I'm right. doing it to help creatives who want to be in fashion. It just happens to be, they happen to be people of color, or they happen to be Black in this instance. And, I know, and I've had this conversation, I've lived in London for 30 years. I've worked in the fashion industry all that time. I can still go to fashion events in this country in London, which is like considered to be one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world, and I can be the only Black person in the room.
Really?
In the 21st century.
Wow.
I can go to fashion events, I can go to awards, I can go to dinners, I can go to press conferences, and I can be the only Black person in the room.
Wow.
And I've worked in organizations where I was the only person of color in the entire organization, the only management, the only board level person, in the business. And again, talking about this whole thing about education and getting Black people and underrepresented people into the creative industries, you can go through a lot of businesses in this country, public relations, design, fashion businesses, event management, PR. You would have to search high and low to find anybody above a manager who would be a person of color or Black in those businesses. They just don't exist. And that's the 21st century in fashion and creative in London. Wow. So, it's not just in America. That's a problem everywhere in the world. And, part of, righting some of that wrong is to be able to give some of those tools and some of that knowledge to people who have talent, who wouldn't have access to people like me in terms of being able to get that experience, get that knowledge, and to be able to understand the collections, understand where they come from, because I'm able to look at the product as well as the business and go, okay, this, focus on this, get rid of that, don't do this, you don't need a PR, get, blah, blah, blah. And that those little pieces of advice can be enormously beneficial when you haven't had anybody helping you. And so the biggest successful businesses in fashion, and I still stand by this today, have always been a combination of the creative and an opposite partner who was not even necessarily a business savvy person, but just a non-creative. Right. Another person to manage all the other stuff. Yeah. Because it's that 80-20 rule. You end up, and every designer, every creative will tell you, you go into your business, if you run your own company, you're creative, and I want to do all this, but actually you end up spending 80% of your time running the business, marketing, pitching, trying to find business, doing your accounts, etc. And then actually you spend 20% of your time doing the thing you love to do. And that's what happens with fashion. So the people who've been successful are the people who've had somebody who's able to run all of the other stuff, and actually you can focus on the creative, which is what you're good at. Yeah. But it doesn't happen that often. And it's really interesting. We were talking about it recently. If you go through a lot of the successful brands, there were either collaborations, partnerships, or there was a business person who was the kind of behind the scenes, whether it's people like Valentino, whether it's people like Tom Ford, incredibly focused and successful. But actually Tom picked the right people, and also people who ran the businesses. And it's still today biggest challenge, finding somebody who can help you run your business, who isn't a creative, who you can afford, right, who has the skills to be able to do that whilst you are creative in fashion. And it sounds like you kind of have both sides of that in your head. It's like you have both sides of your brain working, which a lot of people, like you said, don't have access to both sides. Absolutely. Having gone from being the creative to particularly in my training, my training was working with private label, high street brands, as I said, because it was so huge. The volume was vast. The SKUs, the number of products, the ranges, it was because, high street brands are dropping, every 8 weeks, every 10 weeks. It's not just spring, summer, autumn, winter. So the development, and we spent a lot of time developing. We would go to Milan and to New York and to Japan, and product development was done exactly the same way as it was a designer label. All of that would go on, all of the critiquing, all of the designing, and then working with the buyers, the merchandisers, etc. So that becomes one of the things with Coats Viola that I worked with, that we had woven factories for woven material, and then we had knit factories for the jersey material. So I spent a couple of months in each factory. So I learned from fabric in, lay planning, cutting, manufacturing, quality control, tech, goods out. So and when you learn at that scale, you absorb there's so much information. But when you're doing it over a period of time, you become so clued into it. It becomes second nature. But but then you then people kind of realize, partly the fashion problem is that there are lots of very good and talented people who can give advice, but they only can give advice on one part of it or
Right.
one element of it, and that's why I've, in certain respects, been held in regard, because I can sit down and talk about the product and the creation and the design, and because I love fashion, but also I can talk about, the factories and manufacturing and how you're going to produce it, and who's going to make it, and how much it's going to cost, and what's your margins, and then and then taking it all the way across to the PR and the marketing and the media side, because I've worked in that. I've published a magazine, so it's like that's kind of it's the holy grail. I need all that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a friend of mine who he and his wife, they own salons, and he cuts the hair. So he does the hair, the color. She runs the business side of it, and they're very successful. They have multiple salons in like multiple states, and it's all, I think, because, and she was even giving them a hard time about it the other night when we went to dinner. When we were leaving, she said something about, we were talking about how long we'd all been married. And she had said something to him about, you wouldn't be nearly as successful if it wasn't for me. You'd be great at what you do, but you wouldn't have success. And she's right, because he even tells me, because we trade out sometimes on different things, and he'll tell me, he's like, I just cut the hair. He said, I'm the talent, I'm the hired help. He said she's the one who controls all the books and the marketing and all that. That's her thing. Yeah. You don't want to have anything to do with it.
If you have that opposite number who can run the business and let that person get on, because that's, it's very interesting, because I do some lecturing in universities, and fashion universities are very much, we're not here to teach them business, we're here to teach them, they want to be the best creatives and designers. Right. And I'm going, yeah, but that's not enough anymore. There has to be, there are now foundations, and we build in enterprise modules and things, because you have to understand how business works. It just isn't enough to sit. If you want to go off and be a designer and work for a big design company, fine, but most people don't. Or that journey is going to be very, it's very zigzag. Mm-hmm. It's not a straight line from A to Z of your career, particularly in fashion, particularly nowadays.
Right.
So it's like you go and go, okay, well, you got to do all this. And so it is quite interesting in terms of how that's changing in college and university level for creatives, but it's still about trying to make them the best creatives that they can be, because that is their skill. It's like an artist. It's the same. Fashion is not art, but in terms of that creativity has to be nurtured and trained and developed, and given the space and the breathing room and the support to be able to thrive. And if you can't do that, if you're constantly struggling about money or cash flow or how you manufacture, you're never going to make it. Or you'll make it, it'll be very tough. Yeah. And then people get burned out, because it's 10 years of all of that 24/7, and you're just exhausted. And you're still not turning over $500,000 or $1 million, right, which is by by a lot of people's standards, that's a lot of money, but it's not in fashion to be successful. Yeah. So that's where fashion is today.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, for sure. Tell me about your magazine. Are you still doing that?
No, well, basically I decided after many years, I've always been crazy about magazines since I was a teenager, and then when I started getting interested in fashion. So in 2016, I decided that I was going to launch one. Probably the worst time in the world where media was going, but it's one of those things whereby I decided I was going to do it. Now that if I don't do it now, it's never going to happen. So I pulled together a small team and set out designing a men's lifestyle magazine, which is called What's What, and a play on my name. Yeah. And it basically was my hashtag on my Instagram, What's What. Oh. And then one of my friends who was a designer said to me, oh, you've got to use that for the magazine. And I'm going, oh, that's a bit egomaniac, that's a bit egotistical. And he said, no, it's great. It's so you, and it's you, and it is you, and it's your name, and it's a play on words, and it's perfect. You got to use it. I'm going, anyway, I used it. So spent a year in development, designing, art direction, concept, editorial concept. What we couldn't do at the same time was build the digital side, so we couldn't do the website because it was just too much work. Right. Because doing a digital edition of a magazine is like having a second magazine, because we weren't just going to replicate it and stick it up online. So I had no knowledge of publishing, but I had enough knowledge of how businesses work and what I needed to do. So my research and my development and my business, but I did all the things that I tell other people to do. But it's like fashion. If you actually put down on paper how expensive it is to publish a magazine, you would never do it because it's madness. So it became the passion project. And basically, after a year of development discussion, we launched in 2017. It was biannual. I was very fortunate in so much as because I understood the way that image and branding and perception and fashion works, although it's lifestyle. I had a really amazing sort of mock-up, and all of the precursor to it was as good as or as close as I wanted the real magazine to be. So people bought into it because I also, partly because I have a long and well respected reputation in the industry. So I knew a lot of people, and because of being at the British Fashion Council and on the Fashion Week, I knew all the PRs, and the PRs know all the brands, and and then the other ancillary and accessories, and then so I know a lot of people, and therefore and hopefully have a relatively good reputation. So people were on side because they knew it was me. And they said, because it's you, we know it's going to be good.
Right.
And and true to their word, a lot of people were very supportive. It was incredible, and I was fortunate to be able to get a UK local distributor, and also an international distributor for the magazine from the first issue, which is quite unusual. But it's very expensive. Again, I don't know if you know about magazine distribution, but they charge you 55% of the cover price straight off the top. So it ends up, you end up working for them rather than them working for you. So
I did not know that.
And then when you go international, you have to pay freight as well. So you end up, that's why it's that kind of, it's a catch-22, because you need to be on the shelves to get advertisers and to get, people interested in your magazine. To get on the shelves, you got to pay a distributor more than 50% of your, upfront fee, and then everything else that goes with it. But it has to be done. So we, by first issue, we actually managed to get to America. We got to a number of European countries. By the second issue, we got to 17 countries. By the third issue, we got to 30 countries. We're also selling it direct to consumer online. So we got from Australia to New Zealand, to South America to Japan, most of Europe, and the uptake was incredibly. The feedback was really positive, but the cost of producing a print magazine, 104 pages of editorial, it was on beautiful stock, it was slightly larger format, and it's horrendously expensive, because also we're doing something that a lot of magazines don't do. We were paying people who contributed, and a lot of magazines don't pay people, even the profile ones. But I said, well, if I can't make it a business right from the get-go, then it's not going to happen. So that was part of the challenge. I was very fortunate. We managed to get a media agency that actually Paris-based, who loved the concept, because they said it's not too highbrow, arty, which a lot of men's magazines can be, and it's not just fashion. It's a really nice mixture, because we were doing interiors for men, food and cooking, wellness, grooming, but very much looking through a lens of the metropolitan man, so to speak. And there was definitely a niche for it. So they were amazed. The woman who ran this company, she just, I was introduced to her and I pitched it, and she said, "Oh my God, it's amazing, it's great, it's fantastic." We were just on the cusp of getting Caring to sign for advertising, which would have been the holy grail. So that's their, like, Balenciaga, Saint Laurent. And we were talking with Bell and Ross watches, because I don't do watches, but that was one watch brand I do like. And I said, okay, we'll work with them. Had meetings in Paris with them, came up with this whole concept about doing product launch, because we were changing the way that the magazine was going to present itself and also engage with readers. And it was very much going to be about taking the brands to the reader, and also the experiential, so doing events, kind of the way advertising has become with magazines now, like the Vogues and the GQs. It's about events, it's about awards, it's about it's not just advertising pages anymore.
Right.
So we'd already started all our conversations, and I had great feedback. We had amazing ideas, and etc. So unfortunately, we got to issue 4, and at this point, it was costing us 35,000 an issue.
Oh wow.
Which is coming out of we were completely self-financed. I also wasn't able to do other work because it was 24/7, and commissioning editors, finding photographers, commissioning stories, doing a little bit of little bit of writing myself, for 104 pages of editorial. And you're a photographer, you understand just doing a shoot.
Yeah.
So times that by 5 major shoots, and then all the rest of all the other editorial the way that I wanted it done. But the feedback and the editorial feedback was amazing. Long story short, we had to pull the plug on the print edition by issue 4, and I'm in the process now of trying to develop the digital platform with an e-commerce, a revenue generation built into it with e-commerce. So we come up with a slightly different model about how we engage with the brands. So it's not advertising as such, which involves podcast and video, very interactive across the board, but a different way of presenting brands. So we hope it will be enticing to sort of omni digital, but a kind of interesting way of engaging with your consumer. So that's working on now, and I don't know when it's going to launch, but that's the next stage. But it's been an amazing journey, but a very expensive one. Never publish a magazine with your own money. Never.
Yeah. But, that's what my dad says about owning a restaurant. He said, "Don't ever own a restaurant."
Absolutely, never do it with your own money. That definitely a magazine. But
wow.
There you go. But I loved it. It was amazing, and again, I had to learn publishing. I literally went to the books. I went to the library. I interviewed all these people. Because I had access to so many people within fashion, I was able to get access to magazine people, and actually, I just built a plan on my knowledge and just my taste and my understanding of what I needed it to be for the market that I saw was the way it was. And I guess my experience and my knowledge over the years of industry and business and fashion, all those things combined, I obviously have some sense of all those sort of things in a weird way. So it was just dipping in, even subconsciously dipping into all that stuff that you've done, whether it's a brand or a product or a launch or or an event or a creative, or so it just kind of came together. And because again, I was very fortunate. People who knew me said, because it's you, it's going to be amazing. We're going to support you, and they did. And it was. The feedback was phenomenal. The editorial feedback was so good. We were getting people calling us up about the brands, and people on Twitter, and it was, which I said to the brands, if we do it right, they will engage. The way that we want to make this work is that it's not just about a like and a click on social media. We want to get that customer who will know what we're talking about, who has the money in their wallets, who will go and find the brand and then will buy the product. And by the first issue, we did a shoot on coats. And we had all these people. Where do we get this corduroy coat? To the brand, in Twitter and on social. And I'm saying to them, "See, I told you it would work. This is why you need to advertise with us. Yeah. It will work." And and actually, we had one of the people who bought the magazine, because we were selling it online. So of course, running it through my original, we had a problem with our Instagram for the magazine. So the one that's currently up is a new one, but we had quite a big following, and again, because of my own personal Instagram, I've got nearly 30,000 followers, so all of that kind of cross pollination worked really well. But people were buying it and then going, "Oh my god, it's amazing!" And then one chap in Washington DC took it to the White House, and he was standing in the front of Pennsylvania Avenue, and he held it up and said, and took a photograph on Instagram and said, "Look, What's What magazine has arrived in Washington. Go and find a copy of it." And then somebody in Sydney had seen him do that, who bought it and went to the Sydney Opera House and photographed it and said, "Oh, what's in Sydney? Go and buy it." And people start doing that. People then would start sending photographs and posting on Instagram where they'd seen the magazine. "Oh, I've seen it in the Trocadero, the Musi Trocadero in Paris and
Yeah.
photographing it on the newsstand, or I've seen it in the store, and it was just, and that is, you can't buy that. That is endorsement that you just cannot buy, because third party, other people loving what you do and going out and saying, on Instagram, the Holy Grail, go and buy it. So we knew we were doing something right. And I'm very proud of it, but it was a lot of work, and hopefully we'll get back there at some point.
Well, good luck with that. I hope it works. Okay. Well, I've had you on for about an hour and 10. So I'm going to let you go, but I want to ask you one more question, because there's a lot more. I think we could keep talking for a long time, especially about some other things, about New York and San Francisco. But I will, what's the strangest, most interesting, unusual, crazy kind of something that's happened to you since you got into the business that you just look back on and go, that's a little, I can't believe that happened?
Okay, I'll kind of slightly skew that into, one of those situations whereby, if I'd known now what I know then.
Okay, absolutely.
When I was in licensing, we would, as I said, the company that I worked for was very much, it was quite old school. It was owned by a British husband and wife team, very, it was quite proper.
Yeah.
And the intellectual properties were very, conservative, classic children's classics. We represented the British Museum in London. So, very much, art and, literature and, publishing, but very, very kind of sedate, in inverted commas.
Yes.
But of course, because we were a global agency, people would seek us out to pitch, IP, new brands would come to us going, we want to license our product. Can you help us? So we'd always get, we get hundreds of these. So one of the ones that came my way was a new video game. And I was like, not really sure about this. It's like, whatever. And kind of put it up to the owners and said, okay, this has come across my desk, but I'm not totally sure, but it could be interesting. We should maybe meet with them, maybe talk to them. And the owner said, absolutely, categorically not. It's so not right for us. It's inappropriate, and we don't like the characterization, and it's just, and of course this is before the internet proper and social media. This is, this was, again, gaming was, video games and Xboxes and whatever. And so I said, okay, that's, but I said, I think we should kind of revisit it. And, we used to send it out to all the heads of different companies. So what do you think? And anyway, word came back, no, I don't think it's really us, blah, blah, blah. That property turned out to be Lara Croft's Tomb Raider. I cannot begin to tell you how many billions times.
Yes, wow.
Over the years. But, people say, if I knew now what I knew then. So that's my story about, I wish I'd known. Well, I was actually up for taking it, but it was also quite the way it was presented at the time, because it wasn't the finished thing, but it was a little bit too racy, and a bit, because it was kind of all that, the way that it was kind of all drawn like that, but it was a little bit too racy, and the conservative British owners were like, I don't think so, that's not appropriate for our organization. But several billions, I don't know how many billions with the movie franchises and the game. I mean, it must be tens if not hundreds of billions of over the years. That was more than 25 years ago.
Wow.
So that's my parting story.
David, thank you so much. That was a great story, by the way. Yes. Wow. Well, thank you for doing this.
My pleasure. Fun. Very nice to talk. Very interesting. Lots of other stuff. You never know. But great to talk, and most enjoyable.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Well, maybe we can set up a part 2 at some point.
You never know. Yeah.